Gregory88 is the name of a Twitter user that's been posting since mid-2018, and his posts are bizarre to say the very least. Today we're going to be taking a look at his story, one involving a secluded inherited estate, relics, and a cloaked figure that seems to be watching Greg's every move, despite not having any eyes. In case you guys missed it, I did cover this story briefly in another video I just posted on the top internet oddities of 2018, so if you want to give that a watch, it'll be linked down below. The video is ranked, but also features updates to stories if any are available. Now, in case you're on the other end of things and came here from that video, we'll be starting from the very top and work our way down to Greg's most recent tweets. At the end of this video, I'm going to quickly break down a few things we saw, and if you have any theories based on the questions that come up, feel free to tweet them at me. With that said, let's begin. Greg's first set of tweets were fairly mundane, mostly consisting of posts about things like food or watching TV. The tweets you see here were made between July 22nd and August 16th. So far, so good. Everything seems completely normal. August 27th. Greg tweets the following. Just found out my grandpa died. Never really knew him, but still. My mom never wanted to talk about him, and I never really asked. After this point, Greg seems to completely go dark for the entirety of September and most of October until he posts this on October 29th. Again, things still seem normal. Greg is outside enjoying himself. Not too long later, however, Greg posts the following. Something weird is happening in the woods outside my house and I don't know what to do. I guess I should start at the beginning. This isn't really my house. It was my grandpa's, but I guess it's mine now. He died a couple months ago, and because of some tricky paperwork, I'm apparently responsible for it now. He lived pretty far away, up in the mountains by the lake. There are a couple other houses down the road, but they seem like they're empty for the season. I assume they're summer houses. I've been here for a few days and it's really pretty, but it's super quiet and chilly. My mom never talked about my grandpa and I only met him once, when I was really young. I think they had a bad relationship, but the few times I asked about it, she got annoyed and changed the subject. So basically, I don't really know what I'm doing here. This guy from my grandpa's estate basically told me the house is mine now, so I came here to sell it as fast as I can and go home. I guess it's not that easy to just sell a house, especially one in the middle of nowhere. At any rate, I think I'm alone up here, or at least I was. I figured I'd be up here for a couple weeks to get all this handled and go home and be done with it. I'm on break from grad school, so I don't really have any other responsibilities at the moment. But now weird things are starting to happen. It started on my third day here. There's a little town about 25 minutes away, and I'd gone to get some food and supplies since I don't know how long I'm staying. When I got back that evening, there was something strange on my door. It was this artifact. I don't really know what to call it. It was obviously handmade. It was made of sticks and twine and had some small bones tied into the middle of it. I didn't think too much of it at the time. I figured it was probably a kid from one of the other houses trying to mess with me, so I took it off the door and tossed it in the fireplace. By the next morning, I'd pretty much forgotten about it, and honestly I had too much on my plate at the moment to worry about some kid's prank. So I got up that morning, made some breakfast, and went out on the deck to have some coffee. I was sitting there drinking my coffee when I noticed something hanging in a tree just over the railing. It was another one of those artifacts. It was just like the last one, but it had a rock tied to it instead of a bone. And then almost immediately I saw another one in a tree farther down by the ground. I went down the deck steps to retrieve it, and then I started seeing even more of them. They all had different objects tied to them. Bones, feathers, that sort of thing. It was definitely weird, but I was more annoyed than anything, thinking that someone was in my yard decorating the trees with these ugly goth Christmas ornaments. Also, if someone was trying to scare me, it was going to take more than some arts and crafts project to do the trick. I gathered all the artifacts together and burnt them like the first one. So after I disposed of all the stick things, I took a shower, got dressed, and went back outside to do some basic tidying and whatnot. The deck and the yard are sort of overgrown, and leaves are starting to fall and cover everything. Being a new homeowner is a lot of work, turns out. The thing is, that's when I found something that actually did make me nervous. I was raking a corner of the yard when I saw something dark on the ground off by the trees. I couldn't tell what it was from afar, so I went to investigate. At first I thought it was a blanket, but when I got closer, it looked like a big sweatshirt or hoodie or something. I didn't want to touch it, but it was obviously clothing of some kind. I looked around and realized that it was a whole encampment. There was a couple of old socks, a pair of what I think was underwear, a few old napkins scattered around, a plastic spoon, and creepiest of all, a beat-up notebook. I flipped it open, but there was nothing written inside. A whole bunch of pages had been ripped out, so I know someone had been using it. Plus, you could sort of see the shadow of pen marks on the most recent page, but I couldn't make out what had been written there. Anyway, that definitely freaked me out. It was clear that someone was camping on my property and possibly trying to scare me out of the house. I wasn't really sure what to do about it, though. What could I do? I definitely didn't sleep well that night. That was the day before yesterday. The next morning, I sort of expected more weird artifacts to be outside, but I didn't see anything. And the encampment was gone, so I figured it was probably a homeless person passing through or something. I thought that was the end of it, and I turned my attention back to the house. I realized that the house had almost no cleaning products, and I needed to pick up supplies again. I drove into town and picked up some Windex, some spare light bulbs, and some other stuff, then came home. The driveway ends a ways up from the house, and then you have to trek down a path which bends around the side of the house to get in. I was walking around the house when I saw some movement across the yard near a tree. I froze dead in my tracks. Someone was standing under a tree staring at my house. They didn't see me though, since I was partly behind some trees and a good distance away. Whoever it was, they were wearing the same dark hoodie I'd seen in the grass the day before. As quietly as I could, I set down my shopping bags next to me and slipped my phone out of my pocket. I did manage to take a couple photos, but the person turned and disappeared into the woods. I stood there for a couple minutes, too nervous to move in case the person came back, but they didn't, so I picked up my bags and hurried inside. I picked up the phone to call the cops, but I put it back down because I didn't even know what I'd tell them. Someone was looking at my house? Like any police officer would take me seriously. And, like an idiot, I destroyed all the weird artifacts from before, so there wouldn't even be any evidence. I felt like there was nothing I could do right then. I was mad at myself and feeling scared all alone in that house, so I locked all the doors and left out the back. I went down the lake because I didn't know where else to go. I just knew I didn't want to be in that house at the moment. I walked a ways down the lake shore and sat for a while looking out at the water. I thought about getting in my car and just going home, but I felt like that would get me in trouble. There's all sorts of property tax stuff I don't understand. I felt trapped. On top of that, I couldn't decide if I was actually in any danger. When my grandpa died, it took me a couple months to actually get up to the house, so maybe someone was just squatting in the empty house? And now that I'm here, they might just leave on their own accord. It was starting to get dark, so I reluctantly headed back to the house. I walked up the stairs leading to the back of the house, but right before going inside, I got this weird chill. I made up my mind that I absolutely did not want to stay in that house overnight. I decided to go get my car and drive into town to find a motel for the night. The house was all locked up and I already had my keys, so I went back around the house and towards the path that led to the driveway. And that's when I saw her. The figure from before, standing right in the middle of my front lawn, staring straight at my house. I froze in place, completely in shock. I was practically right next to her, but it was almost as if she didn't see me. And then it hit me. She couldn't see me because she had no eyes. Just shiny skin over where her eyes should be. And she had almost no hair at all. I wanted to run, but I felt like if I moved even a little, she'd hear me. As quietly as I could, I went for my phone. I needed some sort of evidence to show the cops. It all felt like it was happening in slow motion. I feel sick to my stomach as I'm writing this, but I was able to get it on video. My heart is racing just thinking about this. I haven't been able to watch it since I recorded it, but here it is. I ran back around the house and got inside. I scrambled upstairs and looked out my bedroom window at the front yard, but she vanished. Remembering it now, it feels like it really didn't happen, like it was some kind of nightmare or something. I called the cops and explained what had happened. I'm sure I sounded crazy, but they said they'd send someone by the morning and to keep my doors locked. So, that's where I am now. Alone in the woods, freaking out. October 31st. After taking a day off from posting, Greg is back again, and with quite a few interesting updates. He first apologizes for the lack of posting, explaining the subpar reception where his grandfather's estate is located. He also says that he managed to talk to a police officer the day before, and here's how that thread went. I explained everything to the cop and even took him out to the clearing where I found the stuff, but it was all gone except for the notebook. And since the notebook is empty, it was basically useless. I feel like the cop didn't believe me anyway. I showed him the photos I took of the stick things, and he said at worst it counted as vandalism. But without physical evidence of trespassing, they couldn't do anything. Even when I showed him the video, he still acted really skeptical. He kept asking if I knew the person in the video. I think he thought I was pranking him or something, so I ended up just getting frustrated. The cop said to call the station if anything happened, though. After he left, I went back to get the notebook from the clearing. Maybe there's a way to figure out what was written on the last page? I don't know. Anyway, the cop drove away and I was alone again. It's so quiet up here. All I want to do is leave, but I feel like I can't. I'm so far away from home that I can't even invite a friend up here to keep me company. And even if someone did come, it would take them a couple days. I haven't seen the woman from before since, but I feel like she's still out there. And other weird things are happening too. I took a walk around the lake yesterday because I wanted to get a look at the other houses in the area. Maybe see if someone else has noticed anything weird. The thing is though, they're all empty. Every house is totally dark and there are no cars in any of their driveways. I haven't seen a single person at all, except one. Sort of. After I came back from my walk, I was out on the deck and saw a boat in the water, way off in the distance. They weren't moving, and they stayed there all afternoon. I feel like they were watching me. They actually stayed out there in the same place until it got too dark to see them anymore. Normally, I'd think they were just fishing if it weren't for what happened the day before, and the fact that all these houses are empty, where did they even come from? Anyway, the boat was gone this morning, so who knows. I microwaved some oatmeal for breakfast and took it down to the dock near the water. It's weird, but I sort of feel safer down there, in a way. The water makes me feel less stressed, I guess. I was actually starting to feel a little better about everything this morning. If it wasn't for what happened next. I'd finished my oatmeal, and I was starting to head back to the house when I noticed something in the water. It was in this little inlet by the shore. It was small and white, and at first I thought it was a brightly colored rock, but I wasn't sure. It seemed too round to be that, though. Probably against my better judgment, I took off my shoes and went into the water to retrieve it. It was an eyeball. This has to be from an animal, right? Please tell me this is from a big fish or something. I threw it back in the water and hustled back up to the house. I washed my hands in the sink and sat on the couch for a long time. I don't know what's going on. I still can't believe I picked that up out of the water. To make matters worse, the boat is back out there again. It showed up again this afternoon and it's just sitting there in the same place as yesterday. Are they watching me from the boat? After this thread, Greg takes another break from posting, this time for nearly a week until his eventual return on November 6th. This time, Greg starts out by explaining to us that he's been hearing sounds at night, specifically things moving throughout the woods. Despite being a bit creeped out, Greg convinces himself that it must be the deer, even though at this point that's clearly not the case. Greg also mentions that the night before he heard what he thought were screams, so of course he had to investigate once morning arrived. To his horror, but perhaps not to his surprise, what Greg found were insides. From what, he couldn't be sure. Greg posted an image of this on another site to avoid being flagged by Twitter, and I know I'm breaking immersion here, but I can't show it either because this channel may go bye-bye, so spooky music back in place, and go! Greg then tells us that he disposed of the remains further away from the house, then he switches his attention over to the blank notebook that he had found on the property. I've been trying to figure out what's written in this notebook from the woods. I've had it for a couple days and I can see faint letters, but I can't really make them out. A bunch of people replied and told me to do a pencil or charcoal rubbing, but I don't have anything like that. I did find a bunch of pens, but no pencils, so I had to go back into town. It was actually really hard to find charcoal. I finally had some luck at this little hardware store. The box didn't even have a price tag on it, so I feel like it'd been sitting on the shelf for years. It seems like people in this town are starting to recognize me, and I don't like it. I didn't plan to be here that long, but it looks like I may not have a choice. People are nice enough, but it seems like the kind of town where everyone knows everyone, and I definitely don't belong. When I was in the hardware store, these little kids were following me around and giggling and making fun of me. I think they were twins or something. I couldn't really hear what they were saying, but I'm sure they were making fun of me because little kids are jerks. On the way out of town, I stopped at the grocery store, but they were out of some things that I wanted. It seems like they're always out of stuff. They've been out of eggs for a couple of days now, so I just got some Pop-Tarts and stuff and left. Anyway, the notebook. I've actually been putting it off for most of the afternoon because I wasn't sure if I wanted to find out what the woman was writing in it. But I can't ignore it forever. I'm gonna eat dinner and then I guess I'll try the charcoal. I'll be back in a bit. So I did the charcoal rubbing over the most recent page of the book like people were telling me to, and I am not sure what I was expecting, but it wasn't this. November 9th. So I called my mom yesterday. I wanted to see if she knew anything about this place. She said I've actually been here before when I was really young, but I don't remember any of that. I tried to ask her again why she never got along with my grandfather, but she's so cagey about it. She grew up in a town nearby, and my grandfather didn't move into this house until after my mom left for school. I guess she never really came back. We talked for a little bit, but my reception here is spotty. She asked me if there's still wine in the cellar, and I told her there wasn't a cellar, but she said there is. There's a bunch of old antiques in the basement, and behind some filing cabinets there's a dusty little wine cellar. I can't believe I missed it at first. It's full of wine, and some of it's really old. There were also these weird wooden wine stoppers all over the place. And look at some of these bottles. I don't know anything about wine. I wonder if they're good? Anyway, at least I have a surplus of alcohol down here to take my mind off of how weird things have been lately. This house keeps surprising me. I keep finding weird stuff around the property. Like, there's a collapsed shed in the back, a little ways through the trees. It's not that strange, I guess, but I can't help overthinking everything I see now. A little ways away from the shed, I found this in the middle of a clearing. What is this? None of it makes sense, and there's something else I found that I can't stop thinking about. There's so much junk around the house, and I'm trying to clean it up, partly because it'll help this place sell faster, but also to keep my mind off of things. Anyway, I was sorting through some debris and found these old rusty letters in a pile on the ground, partly under the foundation. I could see some nail holes on the side of the house, so I think they were on the house at some point. I know sometimes people give like houses names, but I can't figure out what they might have said though. I brought them inside and laid them all out on the kitchen floor to see if I could make sense of them, but no luck so far. Maybe someone else can figure it out. November 21st. After another break, Greg returns to explain that there was something weird about the town down the road from his grandfather's property. He tells us of his visit to what seems like the town's one and only restaurant, describing the experience as bizarre. Greg had ordered Eggs Benedict only to receive some without the most important component of the dish. When he brought this up to the waitress, she claimed, "We don't have that," and when asked about how that was possible for a diner early in the day, the woman apologized and walked away. Confused, Greg turned to the diner's menu to see if this really was the case, and sure enough, eggs weren't listed anywhere, not even in the dishes that feature them as a centerpiece. On his way out, Greg noticed a family watching him leave, a family with 2 twin girls. Greg's arrival home, unfortunately, wasn't any better. This is what he posted. "So when I got home, I found something folded up and wedged in my front door near the handle. Someone clearly wants me gone." It was written on the back of a tag of some sort. I'm guessing it was that eyeless woman from before. I haven't seen her, but I think she's still out there. November 29th. I saw something out in the woods today. I've been trying not to spend all my time at the house since being cooped up all the time makes me feel crazy. Even though it might not be super safe to be out alone in the woods, it still feels better than being home all the time. Anyway, I was taking a long walk today. These woods would be so pretty if I didn't feel like something was going to murder me out here. I was actually almost enjoying myself when I stumbled into a clearing and found something strange. There was a single filthy chair overlooking a ledge. It didn't seem that creepy at first, but I got this funny feeling, so I took out my phone and pulled up my Maps app. Sure enough, the chair was pointed in the exact direction of my house. I was probably a mile away from the house at that point, but it was still weird. It made me feel queasy, and I didn't want to stick around, so I hustled out of there. I'd barely walked about 30 feet when I found something else, though. Something way worse. I didn't even know how to describe it. What the hell is this? It seems like every day there's something new, but I'm not any closer to understanding what's happening out here or why. I finally pulled myself away and practically stumbled away from the rock. I felt dizzy walking away. I just wanted to go back home. I started back in the direction of the house, and that's when I saw her again. That woman from before. She was standing up on a hill, seemingly staring at nothing. I darted behind a nearby tree, but luckily I don't think she saw me. I hadn't seen her in weeks, but I knew she was still out there. I took a video from behind the tree. I don't even know why. It's not like it'll do any good, but at least I have some proof that I wasn't imagining any of this. Eventually, she left the hill and disappeared into the woods. Once I was sure she was gone, I left the tree and practically ran back home. The whole way back, I kept expecting her to appear again and, I don't know, attack me or something. I don't understand what she's doing out here. Is she a witch? That sounds so stupid, but I don't know how to explain any of this. Those weird stick artifacts and now this thing on the rock? It feels like witchcraft or something. And on top of that, who's that on the boat I keep seeing out there on the lake? Why is everyone in this town so weird? At this point, I just want answers. And I feel like I'm actually getting close to getting them, I'm just scared of what they might be. December 11th. I found out what those letters spell. I'd basically forgotten about them after finding them. I put them in the back of the closet and pretty much stopped thinking about them entirely. But yesterday I found something else. There's this little alcove upstairs with built-in shelves and a bunch of old books. Sort of a mini library. I was flipping through some of them looking for something to read, and I came across this little book about wine. Tucked inside were a couple of old Polaroid photos. They were pretty faded, so it was hard to make out what they were. This first one was pretty unremarkable. It looks like it's just photos of the trees outside. The second one was even blurrier. For a minute I didn't even know what I was looking at. But then I realized it was of the house, and the letters I found on the ground a couple weeks ago. The photo was super fuzzy, so it took me a second, but I was able to make it out. Deepwater Chapel. This is so weird. I've never heard that name before. Was my house a church or something? I spent the afternoon going through all the other books in the library, but I didn't find any other pictures. I really don't know what to make of this. December 12th. Greg, clearly alarmed, begins this thread by telling us that the woman was in his house. He backs up a bit to explain that yesterday he had been outside when it started pouring rain, resulting in his clothes getting soaked. Once home, he changed out and placed his wet clothing by the fireplace to dry them off and then went to bed. He then begins to describe a dream, or rather a nightmare, that he had that night. In it, Greg and a few of his friends were sitting in a circle out on the deck of his grandfather's home. Greg's friend Eric took control of the conversation, talking about how dark the woods were and how anything could be out there watching and no one would ever know. Greg, playing tough, assured Eric that his comment wasn't going to get to him. In response, Eric narrowed his eyes and bet that he could scare Greg. Only this time his tone changed. He was no longer smiling and everything went quiet. Only the sound of the wind and lake were present. Eric then broke his silence, quietly whispering a question to Greg, asking if someone was watching him sleep. In that moment, Greg sprang up, barely able to move or even breathe. To make things worse, he just heard something from downstairs. Greg quietly snuck around trying to find the source of the noise, but found nothing. While trying to calm himself down, Greg made his way into the kitchen only to find the door wide open. In the final tweet of this thread, Greg hysterically insists that he locked the door and he'd never leave it open, especially considering everything that had been going on. He then considers finding a motel, and he's now beyond his breaking point. The cherry on top of all this, Greg also realizes that his wet clothes are now missing, assuming that the eyeless woman had taken them. A little later, Greg responds to a tweet suggesting that if the woman was able to navigate the house without eyes, she must be familiar with its layout. Greg responds, saying that he didn't even consider that possibility, and that he left the property in favor of finding a hotel. December 23rd. Greg posts the following. I'm sorry I haven't said anything in a while. I've been staying in a motel about an hour outside of town. When I left the house that night, I just kept driving until I felt like it was far away enough to feel safe. I called a locksmith, but they weren't able to come out right away, and there was no way I was going back to the house without new locks. I've been waiting it out here until I can go back, basically doing nothing, jumping at every little sound and feeling crazy. Finally, a couple days ago, the locksmith called back and said he'd come out, so I checked out of the motel and got in my car to drive home. It was a pretty long drive back, and the closer I got to the woods, the worse I felt. Anyway, I drove past the town and reached the woods, where the roads get worse and harder to drive on. They get twisty as you drive up to the house, and you have to be careful not to hit deer. I almost always see a dozen or so deer on my drive, but today there were none. Not a single deer in sight. In fact, the woods seemed a lot quieter than usual. I could have been imagining it, but something definitely seemed off. I was almost ready to turn around when something darted across the road. It was so fast that I wasn't sure if I saw it at all. I panicked and swerved off the road and into a deep groove by the roadside. By the time I realized what had happened, the thing was gone. I have no idea what it was. It was just a blur. But it wasn't a deer. It was red. Like blood. Worse, my car was stuck. It's my mom's old car, this weak little two-wheel drive, and I couldn't manage to get out of the groove. I sat there for a while trying to figure out what to do. I knew it wasn't a good idea to walk the rest of the way, but if I didn't, I'd miss the locksmith and I'd have to either spend the night in the house with old locks, or go back to the motel, which I couldn't afford. I wasn't too far from the house, so it made the most sense to walk the rest of the way and call a tow truck from home. I needed to meet the locksmith anyway. I got out and I started walking. Once I was outside, I realized that I had been right about the woods seeming quieter than usual. I couldn't even hear any birds. It was dead silent. My footsteps seemed so loud. Every twig that cracked under my shoes sounded like a bone breaking. I was periodically checking my phone's GPS to make sure I was heading in the right direction. I had just rechecked my route and was about to put my phone away when I saw something that made my heart sink. It was another one of those artifacts, like the ones I'd seen on my first day here. But it had one of my gloves tied to it from the rainstorm last week. When I left my clothes by the fire to dry, there was a pair of gloves with them. I knew that woman had taken my clothes that night, and this confirmed it. I also knew that I'd find the rest of my clothes before I saw them, and sure enough, I found more artifacts not far from the first. I found my other glove, my socks, and a bandana. Everything from that night except for a sweatshirt that I'd been wearing. I left them alone this time. All I wanted to do was get back to the house, get the locks changed, and call a tow truck. I started jogging a bit, wanting nothing more than to get away from those stick things. After a while, though, I started to think that I should have been home already. I slowed my pace and took my phone out, but it couldn't calibrate this time. It couldn't seem to locate me in the GPS. Still, I could hear the lake off to my left, which meant that if I kept walking alongside it, I should get to my home eventually. I continued moving and tried not to think about getting lost. I must have gotten turned around because I was walking for what seemed like ages. I found myself in a part of the woods that seemed unfamiliar. I had no idea where I was, and then suddenly I saw something off in the distance. Something bright white, almost seeming to glow against the dark trees. I couldn't figure out what it was from a distance, so I went closer, trying to be as quiet as I could. When I actually got close enough to see what it was, my mouth literally fell open. They were eggs. Huge eggs. All in a cluster like a nest. They were enormous. It's hard to explain their size, but you can sort of see them in relation to my boot here. I felt like I was dreaming. Before I even knew what I was doing, I touched one. It was warm, and I had a sudden urge to smash one and see what was inside, but then I suddenly decided against it. I felt sick, like I was going to throw up if I didn't leave right away. I left the clearing and tried to listen for the lake and then headed in that direction. I got to the lake shore and felt a little better. Since I was out of the trees, I had a better view of my surroundings, and I was able to pinpoint my house a ways down the shore. I never thought I'd be happy to see it. The rest of the way back, I felt like I had vertigo. I couldn't make sense of anything that had just happened. I still can't. I reached the house and somehow felt a little better once I was inside. So the locksmith arrived a bit later and changed out the locks. I watched him work in a daze. I also had him install deadbolts. I called a tow truck and they got my car out of the ditch, but now I'm alone again and I can't stop thinking about what I saw. I can't figure any of this out. I don't know what's happening. I know I should leave, but I just can't. At least no one can get inside tonight. December 28th. I heard something. Someone was outside. I was in the kitchen washing a glass and I heard something outside on the deck. A scratching sound. And then it stopped. I thought I imagined it, but then I heard footsteps. For some reason, I just ran outside without thinking. I don't know what's wrong with me. I don't even know if I'm scared anymore, I just want answers. I can't be sure, but I think it was her. I saw someone running into the woods. I'm sure it was her, but I couldn't catch her in time. I did think about chasing her into the woods, but decided against it because I don't want to get lost out there at night. I turned around to go back inside, and that's when I saw what she'd been doing on my deck in the first place. I shouldn't still be surprised by these artifacts, but this one was huge, taller than me. On top of that, it had my sweatshirt from the storm tied in the middle. Honestly, I was just going to leave it there. I'm sick of this. I was about to go back inside, and then I noticed there was something written on the wall behind the artifact. I hadn't even seen it before. Fear the new moon. What does that mean? I don't know where that woman got a marker, and I don't like how familiar she is with my house and property. I guess the new moon is January 5th. January 4th. One day before the new moon, Greg briefly appears on Twitter to point out that along with it, there is supposed to be a storm, and that he thought he'd be safe if he stayed inside. January 5th. It's been storming all day and into the night. Thunder and everything. I've stayed inside all day. Nothing has happened yet. Maybe nothing will happen. Still, I'm nervous. Maybe I shouldn't have stayed? I don't know what's wrong with me. I should leave tomorrow. I'm not really sure what I'm even saying. I just need to occupy myself with something. Writing this makes me feel less alone, like I'm talking to someone. I just can't do this anymore. I'm leaving tomorrow. First thing in the morning. I don't care about selling this house anymore, I just want to go home. I just need to make it through the night. I'll be fine if I stay inside. The locks are new and nobody can get in. I'll be fine. I'm gonna get some wine and stay in the upstairs bedroom tonight. I'll be okay. She's here. She was in the cellar. I practically ran right into her. She didn't even hear me because of the thunder outside. Her back was to me and she was standing dead still in the middle of the room, just staring at the wall. I couldn't move. I felt petrified. All I could do was stand there like a fool and stare at the back of her head. And then she turned around. And she spoke to me. She said she won't hurt me. She said she'd explain everything. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to make sense of this. She said that she'll tell me everything. I'll be right back. Okay, so I'll try to relay everything she said, but there was just so much of it, I can barely keep track of it all. So, first off, she said that she made those stick things for my protection. She says that it's dangerous out here and that she was trying to protect me. When I asked what she was trying to protect me from, she got quiet for a long time. When she finally replied, I could barely hear her. There are things in the water. I didn't really believe her, but I didn't have any rational explanation for the things I've seen, so instead I just listened. Here's what she told me. A long time ago, something came from the sky and landed in the lake. It brought something with it. Something ancient and strange. The people who lived here began to commune with it. They protected it from the outside world, devoted their lives to it, and in return, the thing gave them a gift. The people here were blessed with abnormally long, healthy lives and many children. But it all came with a price. I had so many questions, but I didn't even know which ones to ask, so I just sat there in silence and took it all in. The woman continued. Apparently, in the beginning, there was just the one. It spent most of its time deep in the lake, slumbering. But over time, it made more. Instinctively, I asked about the eggs I saw in the woods, and the woman nodded. There's so many of them now, she said. They come from the water to lay eggs, and the people take care of them. Hide them away until they hatch. But when they do hatch, they need to feed. At that point, I was starting to put two and two together. I thought about all the twins I've seen in town. She must have sensed my understanding because she spoke again. I told you there was a price. The people in this town are blessed with many children, but they don't get to keep them all. When the eggs hatch, the people must bring one of their own to the woods. The creatures need to eat. She was quiet again, then said, "They start with your eyes." I asked her how she knew about all this, but I already knew the answer. I know because it happened to me. she said. "When I was a girl, my father brought me into the woods with the others, offered me up to the newborns." She turned her head towards the window, like she was gazing into the distance. They took my eyes. I waited until she was ready to speak again. It was a long time before she did. She told me how she was led to one of the eggs, how she watched it break open, how something came out of it. Before she knew it, something was on her, burrowing into her eyes. She wasn't sure what happened next. She only remembers the searing pain, and then suddenly she was free. She doesn't quite know if she managed to push the creature off or if someone helped her, but she got away and ran to the woods. She ran until she couldn't breathe anymore. She was too scared to go home, so she stayed in the woods. Eventually the forest became her home, and she's been there ever since. I felt completely bewildered. None of this made any sense to me, but at the same time, it did somehow. I had so many questions I wanted to ask, but I couldn't sort my thoughts. I couldn't figure out what to say. I finally asked, "Why are you telling me this now, after all this time?" The woman didn't say anything at first. She took a long, labored breath. "It's the same time every year," she said. "They come out of the water in the fall, lay their eggs. A few of them begin to hatch early. They feed on animals in the woods. They need strength to make it back to the water. But most of them hatch when it's darkest." She turned to me. Even without eyes, I felt like she was staring right at me. "Tonight is the new moon," she whispered. "Tonight is a ceremony." My stomach began to sink as realization set in. Realization about what was happening out there in the woods at that very moment. "We have to do something to stop it," I blurted out. I started getting out of my chair, but she just shook her head. She said there was nothing we could do. It happens the same way every year. We can't stop it. But I wasn't listening anymore. I don't know what came over me, but I jumped up and ran out the door. Ran into the woods. I don't even know where I was going. At some point the rain had stopped. It was dark and I couldn't see anything, but I could hear things all around me. Things moving through the trees, and I could see lights in the distance. Fire, flashlights, I don't know. I had no idea where to go or what to do. More than once, something ran by me in the trees. I was using my phone as a flashlight and tried to take pictures of the trees, trying to see what was out there, but everything happened so fast. I don't know what these are. This was the clearest shot I could get. They all moved so fast. I ran for what seemed like an eternity. Ran in circles. I had no idea where I even was. Then, somehow I was back in the same clearing where the eggs had been. But they were gone now. Nothing but bits of shell left on the ground. It was all over. I was too late. It already happened and they'd cleaned everything up. I stood alone in the clearing. The lights in the distance were disappearing. It was getting quieter, and just like that I was running again, running towards the lake. I didn't even know why. I couldn't do anything. Branches scraped my face as I ran blindly through the trees. I reached the water, but there was nothing there. I saw some faint ripples out in the black water, but besides that, it was silent. It was over. January 16th. Greg explains that he left the house after the night he met the eyeless woman. He tells his followers that he decided not to sell it, and that he was back home trying to process everything. Greg then goes on to say that since the eyeless woman claimed that the events that took place happened once every year, perhaps there was something he could do next time, although he wasn't sure what. He ends his story by swearing that he won't let this happen again. For now, the story is to be continued. In the end, this is definitely, at least in my opinion, one of the best executed Twitter horror stories out there, and I'm pleased about the fact that Greg, or whatever the author's real name is, has decided to pace the story out. And just for the sake of clarity, yes, this is a work of fiction in case you haven't already figured that out. Right now, it seems like we may actually need to wait a full year for real updates, and if that ends up being the case, I can't tell you how much I'm looking forward to this series. I know a lot of people will probably think that's too long to wait, but the idea has pretty much never been done before. Most things of this nature tend to blow up and fizzle out rather quickly. Naturally, there are still a ton of things we don't have answers to right now, like who the eyeless woman is exactly. The running theory that most agree upon is that the woman is Greg's aunt or some other relative. I say theory, but unless we're being thrown a huge red herring, then it seems like it's pretty much going in that direction, especially given the fact that Greg has only liked one tweet. It asked if maybe the eyeless woman is Greg's mother's twin sister that he was unaware of. Given what happened to her and the little that we know about how the town works, this could explain why Greg's mother isn't fond of her father. We're also still left to wonder who the people on the boat were exactly. Were they there to watch Greg, or were they attending to the creatures who live in the water? Based on the fact that Greg found an eye shortly after, makes me think that they may have been there to feed their, let's just call them, pets. Aside from this, there are also still questions about the creatures themselves and how this all started. All we know is that they came from the sky, live in the water, and lay eggs on land once a year. I'd also love to know if that's solely the reason why the town doesn't eat or stock any eggs. I suppose it seems a bit excessive, but it's too early to make any real judgments given that we don't know all that much about the town and its people. Speaking of the town's people, the jumbled letters that were later revealed to say Deepwater Chapel that Greg found, people have been trying to find out more about what it means. Many assume that Googling the term would lead to an actual church, but that doesn't appear to be the case. Given this, I am thinking that it's possible that the Deepwater Chapel is or was the church of the entire town in a cult-like sense. Keep in mind, they made a deal with these creatures that emerged from the water, and they essentially worship them, so it would make sense if they based their entire religion around these things. Now, Greg did mention noticing small holes in his home where the nails used to be, so we can assume that the property was once the Deepwater Chapel as Greg suggested. As for the present day, it's either been relocated or simply not running anymore given the death of Greg's grandfather, who we can assume ran the church. Continuing with the thematic connections to water, when Greg finds a note left on his door saying to leave, the note was written on some kind of tag. If you look closely, you'll notice that it's meant for repairing some kind of inflatable, possibly a boat, life vest, etc. The last thing I want to address is what the eyeless woman was looking at when Greg ran into her. Yes, she lacks eyes, but given everything we've seen unfold, maybe she doesn't even need them. Notice how Greg said she was just standing there staring at the wall. The thing is, there is something on the wall that Greg drew attention to before. If you look closely, you can make out the form of a bird, and based on the other side also appearing to have wings, I'm guessing the pattern repeats, but from this angle I can't be entirely sure. As for what this seal means exactly, for now I don't know. Yes, the eyeless woman seemed to explain everything the night she finally spoke to Greg, but she was overall still pretty vague. This of course is good news for this series because it actually does have stuff to uncover once it eventually returns. For now, I suppose the story of Gregory 88 will remain dormant, and I for one will be patiently waiting until the next time Greg returns home.